Today, we're going to walk through Apprenticeship for America's recommendations as they relate to the rules. I want to just say that as we approach these rules, we're really not trying to fix every problem with the apprenticeship system, as tempting as that would be. In these rules, we're really reacting to and responding to the rules that are the proposed rulemaking that was published in the Federal Register and which the Department of Labor shared with us in December. So this will feel a little bit constrained because that's really the focus of this conversation. Trust me, Apprenticeships for America, and probably you have lots of ideas about how to improve apprenticeship in the United States. We'll share a couple of those ideas outside the rules, but mostly we're going to be focusing on the rules themselves. As we get started here, I want to just walk through a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, if you're not on mute, put yourself on mute. Because we have a fairly hefty group here today, looks like about 100 people, just use the raise your hand feature so that we can recognize you when it comes time for conversation and questions. And then do make active use of the chat. That's a great way to have side conversations and to note things that we can take up in conversation. The summary for this, great, thank you. Got it. The slides for this webinar are already on our website, so you're free to download those, and we'll have a video up in the next couple of days on our YouTube channel. And then I just want to share in the chat a couple of links that might be of interest to you. First off, if you're not a member of Apprenticeships for America, we encourage you to join. It's free. It gets you on our mailing list and allows us to stay in touch with you on developments in the field. And then just a shameless plug, 2 weeks from today, Apprenticeships for America launches its first ever conference in Washington, D.C. You're all invited. Please come. And there's a link for signing up for that conference in the chat. So please take advantage of that. Let me just start with just to get everyone sort of caught up on where we are. If you haven't been part of the 6 webinars or the summary conversation around the rules, let me just remind you, these rules were published, or rather were released in December, formally published in January. And this is the first regulatory revision of apprenticeship since 2008. So really, think of this as almost a generational opportunity to catch the rules up in terms of current practice and what the field needs. In the Department of Labor's webinar on these rules, they shared 3 goals for these rules: expansion with quality, equity at the center, and consistency and innovation. I think as we have thought about these rules and explored them, I think in ways big and small, the Department of Labor has successfully gone after those goals in these rules. But there are other goals too, and so we're going to talk about some of those other goals today. If you haven't read all 700 plus pages, it's actually smaller in the published register. The rules will have a major impact on apprenticeship in the United States. So there's almost not a single facet of the apprenticeship process that is not touched by these rules. And then really importantly, I just want to point out that the comment period for these rules it ends on March 18th. So we have roughly 3 weeks, a little over 3 weeks, to get comments to the department on what we think of these rules. And if anyone has read the sort of narrative around the proposed regulations, you know that the Department of Labor many times called for commentary, reactions, or thoughts on these rules. So we're taking them at their word and want to be sure that they hear from us. The process that we've used for assessing these rules is we published a summary in December. We did a series of analyses as part of our walk through the rules through the webinars in January and early February. we have engaged literally hundreds of apprenticeship employers, practitioners, researchers, advocates in this work. And I just want to thank everyone who's really been generous in giving their perspective and thoughts on this work. By the way, links to those resources are in the chat if you want to take advantage of them there. So let me just start with and unions. Thank you, Bob. Thank you. And unions and state apprenticeship office leaders. So add those to our set of folks. And by the way, can I just recognize Bob Lehrman, who joined my board chair and one of the founders of Apprenticeship for America, and somebody who's taught me everything I know about apprenticeship. Bob, great to have you with us. So let me just start with a sort of high-level assessment of where we think the rules have gone right and where we think there are challenges or missed opportunities in the rules. The first is that I think many of us would agree that the rules were overdue for a refresh. Going almost 15 years without an update to the rules does suggest the need for a field to sort of keep up with current practice. Yeah, thank you. If anyone's not on mute, just check and make sure you're on mute. If I can just share that. Thank you, Shonda. The rules also codify a lot of guidance and directives that had been that had been promulgated through what the department calls sub-regulatory guidance. And so it really puts into the rules what is expected of people who are registering apprenticeships and the states who are managing apprenticeship systems, how the office should approach apprenticeship. And in that way, I think we're positive on that, in that it provides transparency, clarity, and an opportunity for us to comment on some of that sub-regulatory guidance. And then finally, embedded in the rules is a lot of additional clarity. We might have asked for more, but additional clarity on the role of the key roles of apprenticeship intermediaries, those solutions providers that are helping employers connect to educators and to apprentices and to operate and fashion apprenticeship programs. On the other hand, there are some challenges with these rules. First off, and probably most concerning for Apprenticeships for America, is that there are a series of provisions in these rules that we think have a high risk of alienating employers who are currently providing apprenticeships and prospective employers who might be engaged in an apprenticeship. And as we all know, there is no apprenticeship without an employer. And as Bob has said to me over and over again, apprenticeship is a voluntary act. And so in order to get employers engaged in apprenticeship, we have to have a value proposition that works for them. Some of the rules, we think, undermine, some of them seriously undermine that value proposition. The second is, for those of us who are ambitious about apprenticeship and really want to see it grow and develop over time, we think these rules are not always built for scale, that there are aspects of the rules that would almost require a sort of proportional increase in federal and state staffing to be able to support growth at all. And so anytime you're constrained by whatever the appropriation might be for the Office of Apprenticeship or for a state apprenticeship office, we are operating in a suboptimal fashion. And so our hope would be to be able to introduce some changes that would allow the field and the practice of apprenticeship to grow in a way that is that exceeds the proportionate requirements of the apprenticeship offices that oversee and regulate apprenticeship. In addition, the rules really undermine one of the key features of apprenticeship, which is the flexibility of apprenticeship. We have known that apprenticeship can be apprenticeships can be set up in many industries with many different strategies and approaches. They can be competency-based, they can be hours-based, they can be a hybrid between the two. And there are aspects of the rules that we think, in offering clarity, they may undermine that that objective. And then finally, there's a whole series of innovations and new ideas that are introduced in the rules. We like innovation, we like new ideas. We're just not sure a regulatory framework is the right place to introduce some of those. And so we have a lot of comments on that. Let me also just say, and this is going to be my one comment sort of outside of the rules, that we could, AFA could be wildly successful. We could get every single comment reflected in a final rulemaking for apprenticeships. And we would still have a lot of challenge growing apprenticeship in the United States. And candidly, we think that is really driven by a lack of investment, lack of public sector investment in apprenticeship. The table to the right of this slide illustrates just how underspent we are relative to many of our peer economies. And just to take, say, France, for example, which to our 300 million spends about $10 billion on apprenticeship. If you adjust that per capita, our 300 million is compared to something like 57 billion. And so that really suggests to us that those countries that have really grown and deepened the practice of apprenticeship have invested in apprenticeship. And that's something that's sorely lacking in the US and a key policy action item for the AFA agenda. In summary, what we're going to do now is sort of walk through these 4 areas of opportunity for improvement in the rules. We're going to give you our perspective on those areas. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up for conversation, questions, and any reactions that you have to the rules. We're going to start with our innovation section. There were a number of innovations added to the rules. As I say, we like innovation. Many of the innovations that were called for were squarely on items that Apprenticeships for America had either advocated for or had been developing ideas around. So, for example, Apprenticeships for America has been calling for a set of national occupational standards to guide and streamline the apprenticeship process in the United States. And in fact, there were 2 ideas introduced in the rules: a national occupational standard that was intended to offer sort of national guidance for how apprenticeships might be established, and then national guidelines for apprenticeship standards that was intended to offer sort of customizable templates that could be used by states and at the federal level. We like a lot of that's in here. Let's be clear, there's a lot of good ideas in here, but we actually feel this is an innovation that didn't quite go far enough. So we have a couple of suggestions. Number one, in the rules, these standards are to be developed and promulgated by the Office of Apprenticeship. And we think that's one of these areas where these rules really weren't built for scale. We think the Office of Apprenticeship is staffed by really good people, but it has a big mandate and a big mission. And we encourage the Office of Apprenticeship and the department to think about the use of a third party to support the development of these standards. And so are calling for changes in the rule that allow the department to consider that option down the road. We also note that in the CTE apprenticeship component of the rules, which we're going to talk about in a second, there's a third new standard introduced, the industry skills framework, and we have some ideas about that. We actually think introducing a third standard creates a lot of confusion. It's likely to overburden feedback and comment processes. Employers who the department would want to engage in the development of many of these standards. And we think it actually creates disconnects between CTE apprenticeships and standard apprenticeships. And so we're asking the department to consider revisiting this idea with something we would call a CTE, National Occupational Standard, that would be based on the National Occupational Standards proposed in the rule. And then finally, we think that the idea for these standards isn't fully baked into the rules. So for example, one really to us obvious thing to do with standards is to use them to streamline the apprenticeship registration process. And we call for differential approval timelines for apprenticeship registration efforts that take advantage of the occupational standards and the national guidelines. On the CTE apprenticeship proposal, if you've read the rules, you know that this is a fairly lengthy section of regulations, comprises maybe 25% of the total rulemaking. And we have a couple of broad overarching concerns and then some specific feedback. The first is the CTE apprenticeship proposal in the rules may be a good idea, maybe a bad idea, but we do know it's an untested idea. And we sort of wonder at the use of a regulatory process to advance an idea that has no evidence base behind it. We also think that those of us who are interested in extending apprenticeship opportunities to younger populations, to people who are in school or maybe in college, we think there's many approaches for doing that, and we wonder at the department's decision to establish a sort of in regulation one way, and whether that makes sense. We also think that the rule itself could better prioritize joint and group registration processes and intermediaries instead of leaning quite so heavily on the educational institutions and the larger Perkins infrastructure, CTE infrastructure. We think there's an overemphasis in college credit. We think there are opportunities to improve connections to the public workforce system, which has a very active youth workforce development, set of youth workforce development strategies. And we think that the CTE apprenticeship proposal doesn't really speak to how solutions that would address out-of-school youth. And so within the rules, we have a couple of suggestions. The first, and you're going to see this again, the first is that in the stipulated hours requirements for the CTE apprenticeship, hours for on-the-job training and hours for related technical instruction, we want to make sure that there's clarity that the provisions later in the rules that allow for accelerated progress and advanced standing for participants who are moving quickly through the material, that should be explicitly referenced in those rules, so that the hybrid nature of this rule that allows for competency-based approaches would be stipulated right within the hours as they're named. In addition, we are suggesting that the CTE apprenticeship should be a little bit more calibrated in terms of its requirements for post-secondary education credit, and that should really be based on the needs of the occupation that's the focus of a CTE apprenticeship. This may seem like a technical matter, but we actually think for the temporary employment roles that are offered by CTE apprenticeship, a probationary period is not always going to be relevant, and we call for the elimination of that rule. And then finally, we think some of the language that describes the sponsors and potential registrants of CTE apprenticeship, that language should be broadened to make sure that there are as many possible sponsors available to support CTE apprenticeship as possible. The last innovation that we wanted to, that we saw in these rules was the endpoint assessment. Another idea that Apprenticeships for America has actually supported. We think it's a good idea. We like what we see in other countries around endpoint assessments, that there is, a way to work with an apprentice at the end of their period and assess what they've learned in a formal way. But like the CTE apprenticeship, we're a little wary of introducing an innovation like that universally without a proof point or without any sort of testing of this idea in the field, or at least in the field in the United States. And so we have two suggestions for the endpoint assessment. Number one is we think it should be, for most registered apprenticeships, voluntary. We think that's a good way to sort of introduce the endpoint assessment and for the department to get experience with it. We actually think also that that there may be opportunities to require the endpoint assessment in some of the national occupational standards and the national frameworks, where an endpoint assessment could actually be part of the developmental process of those standards in that framework. And so that might be a place to sort of require it. And then we think the department missed a major opportunity here, which is by introducing an outcome-based instrument, that they should have been able to reduce some of the front-end regulatory oversight in exchange for that. And so we are encouraging the department to consider ways that they could streamline registration and oversight processes for those apprenticeship programs that use endpoint assessment. Let me stop there and just ask if there's any questions on this innovations portion of the recommendations as we're working through them.
There was a question in the chat from Vicky. When you're using the word standards, are you referring to the apprenticeship standards document that employers have to submit as part of the process to register their programs?
Yeah, great question. So the national occupational standards that are mentioned in the standards is used in many places, so it's easy to get a little confused. The national occupational standards are think of it as a template, more than a template, as a guide that particular occupations could use, that apprenticeship programs could use in particular occupations, and it would offer all of the component pieces of an apprenticeship registration, all the standards, the related instruction guidance, and so on.
Okay.
And does that make sense, Vicki?
I think I have more questions. The terminology is a little confusing in terms of what everybody, at least, Southeastern Michigan's like an apprenticeship explosion. And there's a lot of new players to this game here. And I think I just have like the word standards. To us, it means the standards document that really speaks to, it's mostly boilerplate information, right?
Yep.
And then if the employer is registering more than one occupation, they're all covered under the same standards document, which is already out there and pretty standard. And then the Appendix A is, there's a separate one for each occupation. Somebody's trying to talk over me.
Bob, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah. First of all the countries that have robust systems have skill standards for their occupations. When I asked my colleague who has projects in Australia, how long does it take to register? He says it's 1 day. And that's because they know what it is that they're going to be training for. They're going to follow the skill standards. Of course, you can always add the requirements for your own apprenticeship program. But it's really, what do we expect the apprentice to learn? And to clarify all the elements of learning, all the competencies that are there. And just one other thing, Urban Institute has been doing these national standards, national frameworks, we can call them whatever, but they're basically occupation-based, competency-based statements of what the job functions are in the occupation and what the competencies are to fulfill those job functions at a high level. And on the Urban Institute website, we have a number of those occupational frameworks already produced.
Okay, so you're talking about what lives in the Appendix A, the on the job. Okay, so not the actual standards document. Okay.
Correct.
So they have all of those out there on the DLO website, but you're proposing a different way for those to look as part of this
Well,
plan?
they have multiple, and actually they don't have, for a lot of occupations, the skill
a single
standards.
standard, right?
And they certainly don't have a consensus standard for most occupations. So you could see, 12 for carpenter, but anyway, yeah. And just to put in one more plug, sorry, John, but
no, good.
There is if you haven't seen it, there is a website that Urban's built as part of a DOL project called apprenticeshipstandards.org. And if you go to that website, it includes a lot of the national frameworks, as well as all the programs in like 22 states and most of the federal frameworks.
It's an amazing resource, and thanks, Bob. I'm going to move us along just in the interest of time, but I think what we're witnessing here is the challenge of innovating in regulation. And sometimes it introduces more confusion than it solves. So I'm going to move us along to the question of scale. We really have a couple of targeted recommendations for this area. The first is that in the area of reciprocal recognition, this is the idea that state apprenticeship agencies across the country should be able to recognize apprenticeships that have been approved elsewhere. We actually call for just language to make sure that when we talk about reciprocal recognition, that it's recognition that is equivalent to local recognition, that there isn't some like junior standard at a state level. In addition, we also think that there are a series of sort of paperwork requirements in the rules that don't really scale well and aren't really built for a digital environment. So for example, the call for signed papers to be transmitted back and forth between apprenticeship programs and registering offices. And then finally, we think that there are a couple of opportunities to streamline some of the related instruction requirements for programs that voluntarily adopt these endpoint assessments, and in that way simplify the registration process. I'm going to move us along to our flexibility guidance. And really we have suitability determination and then a couple of other things, because we actually think the suitability determination is really exhibit one in terms of how the rules have restricted flexibility for apprenticeship. So in the current proposed rules, state apprenticeship agencies would no longer be allowed to do independent determinations of suitability of an occupation. That could only happen at the national level. We actually think that's a mistake. We think states should continue to be allowed to be able to do their own suitability determinations. But we actually think that what happens in states should maybe stay in states until it's been proven, until it's actually been shown to be successful. And so we would exempt programs that have been approved at the state level in an occupation that is not nationally recognized nationally as suitable for occupation. We would exempt that from any reciprocal requirements, reciprocal recognition requirements. We think there are opportunities to dramatically reduce the paperwork reductions in the suitability process. We just think essentially you have to create your apprenticeship and then hope that the Department of Labor will declare it suitable. We think there should be a sort of first order test that folks who are interested in pursuing suitability determination can do before they do all the work of actually creating the apprenticeship. We think the timeline for suitability should be sped up. We think it should be shorter, and we think that there should be a preponderance of evidence or preponderance of proof placed on the Office of Apprenticeship that a suitability determination does not meet standards in order to have it rejected, as opposed to requiring that a suitability standard meet certain standards. Somewhat controversially, we also believe that the requirement that was added in these rules that requires consideration of what's called replicated work processes of another occupation, that requirement should be struck from the rules. We think that inevitably leads to a sort of backwards looking approach to suitability and holds back new apprenticeship occupations as they emerge. And then finally, we actually think that the administrator should be able to unilaterally determine or start a suitability determination process even before there's anyone who's interested in offering an apprenticeship in an area, as a way of guiding the field and creating sort of green pasture for new apprenticeships to be created. Also in the area of suitability, flexibility. We think that there's some language in the rules that doesn't really contemplate online instruction. We know that online instruction is a significant delivery vehicle for related instruction. So we think the rules should be explicit in allowing for that. And we think some of the rules around wage progression make it hard for organizations that are doing that are hiring apprentices at journey worker wages to sort of think about how they fit into that, and just think the wording should be fixed for that. And then finally, as I've stated before, that we think that the language around required hours for related instruction and for on-the-job training should explicitly note that there are provisions in the rules that allow for accelerated progress and advanced standing for apprentices that are moving faster through the program, in that way embracing a hybrid competency-based approach. Let me again just stop and ask if there's any questions on those two sections.
I've got one. Mike Peterson with the California Field Ironworkers.
Oh, hey, Mike.
There's a couple of things in there that I don't know if I'm a big fan of. Unilateral decisions. You never know who's going to be in charge of the federal government at any point in time. I could see that going the wrong way quickly. Depending. So
just to be clear, we're not asking for unilateral decisions. Well, the rules may be stipulating unilateral decisions, so that's a different matter. We're calling for the administrator to be able to unilaterally begin the determination process. In other words, not wait for somebody to come to them for a particular occupation. But it's a fair question, and that's a concern. Anything else, Mike?
Yes, I posted in there earlier that I think that, with apprenticeship, I heard you make some comment about the wages, minimum wage progression. I think if you're going to associate anything with the name apprenticeship, it's the ending, the final result for that apprentice who completes a program should be wages that are considered to be a livable wage, not something that's just barely above minimum wage. So it shouldn't be called apprenticeship if it's going to end up in, something like that.
We actually agree with you on that, and you probably know in the rules there's one of the suitability criteria for an occupation is that it should be a livable wage, supporting wage occupation. We actually agree with that, so we don't disagree there at all.
Okay.
John, I'd like to make a comment.
Yeah, Randy. Hey, Randy, great to see you.
Hi, nice to see you. Actually, two comments. One is when you talked about, and I have to say there's so many terms in the slides you're sharing. Each slide really requires so much more explanation because you're sort of giving us the end point. And I know you can't
Fair
do
enough.
it. I'm just saying it makes it a little bit hard to evaluate what you're presenting. But just one example of that is when you talk about reciprocal recognition. In the world of education, that can only go so far because individual state departments of education have the power and the role to define that in one state you need a BA to do XYZ, or in another state you need a master's degree. So this notion of reciprocal recognition and assuming it can be instituted nationally is a leap. It really is industry specific of whether or not that's a realistic goal. That's the first comment. But then the second comment, and this is in response in part to what Michael just raised, and this will not, I should have mentioned, I am the executive director of Early Care and Education Pathways to Success. We work specifically in the early care and education industry, predominantly in California, but now we're also working in 14 other states through our contract with the USDOL as a national industry intermediary. And I will just say that while I completely agree that apprenticeship should result in a family-sustaining wage with opportunities to go even beyond that, until we have an economic revolution in this country in which essential industries like childcare and home-based childcare and early care and education and universal pre-K, all the fields that are sort of adjacent or that come together to form the ECE workforce. Until this country figures out that without a well-trained, well-compensated ECE workforce, none of these other workforces can go to work. And it's not good enough to say that in the CHIPS Act, grantees are required to include childcare, because if they're including, let's say, to say it politely, less than adequate or less than excellent childcare, you can bet those workers are going to be compromised. The workers that are using that childcare. So it has to be excellent childcare. And in order to get excellent childcare, we have to have the resources to make that possible. And so I feel compelled to bring that out because John
that's great.
say, oh yes, we agree. There are forces within the registered apprenticeship system that would like to disqualify entire industries like ECE from participation in registered apprenticeship on the basis of wages, over which we as an industry have no control.
Yeah. Excellent point, Randy. Thank you for raising that. Let me just say on the reciprocal recognition, and first off, just apologies on terminology. It's we're trying to work through a lot of material very, very quickly, so apologies for that. On the reciprocal recognition, one of the criteria for a state providing reciprocal recognition is that it needs to be compliant with any licensing or requirements at the state level. So that's an out for any state that has a differential licensing requirement, just so you know.
Right.
But I think on the I think the wage comment is a really, really good one, and obviously this is a challenging conversation. But could we just agree, Randy? Let's you and me sort of put our heads together, figure out if there's a way to sort of square this circle. Because I'd love to chat some more with you about that.
Sure.
Great.
I agree with Randy. I think we need, and I think part of the criteria should also be the value added. What is the value added of the apprenticeship? Because, there are people that start at, with already a lot of skills that would be able to command a good wage, and then they can go up to this desired wage level. But then there are people who are starting lower, and apprenticeship is still going to be a big gain for them. So I think the value added aspect has to be one component. As far as reciprocity, a lot of these rules on reciprocity are already there. They're just not enforced.
Right.
And
All right.
I agree with what Bob is saying, but I also will note that, for example, in ECE, Head Start teachers are required to have a BA degree. So we're not talking about unskilled labor, and we're not talking about low credential attainment. But we're talking about people who are expected to have a BA degree and still get paid just barely above minimum wage. So the problem is huge, and it is entrenched in our whole society. We can't just pull it out of that context and pretend you can deal with it just within the framework of apprenticeship.
Yeah,
Thanks, John.
absolutely. Thank you, Randy. Thanks for your comments. And we may not be able to square the circle, but let's at least put our heads together and see what we can do on it. All right, great. So let me take on the last bit of change, recommended changes that AFA is proposing, and this really relates to what may be our most serious concern about the proposed rules, which is the danger that they could undermine or will undermine employer interest, participation, and consideration of apprenticeships going forward. And we think there's a number of areas that the rules could be improved in order to address this. The first is that there's just a series of paperwork burdens. I'm not going to read through every single one of these, but there's a whole variety of paperwork burdens that we think could be limited or circumscribed in order to prevent, in order to address concerns that we know employers will have around their participation in apprenticeship. The second is that there's a couple of legal compliance issues that are built into these rules that we think will create poison pills for many employers. So, for example, there's quite a bit of conversation around what's called unreimbursed costs to the apprentice. This would be if an apprentice has to buy equipment or has to maybe has to buy a computer for their work or what have you. We actually think disclosure of those costs probably makes sense, that an apprentice should know what they're getting into in terms of any costs that they may be expected to bear. But we think a whole oversight and reporting regime around that is going to be very, very difficult for employers to swallow. There is a paragraph in the rules that requires a disclosure of all legal violations. It's quite broad, and as I've said, if you're General Electric considering participating in an apprenticeship program, there would be a book to submit over 150 years as a global organization. We think that can be targeted much more narrowly to matters that relate to apprenticeship and to the sponsor directly, rather than all employers participating in apprenticeship. And then finally, we think that there's some challenges with the non-compete clause, the requirement that apprentice agreements may not have a non-compete clause. We think that the language that's in the rule is overbroad, and we propose its elimination. And then finally, in the area of employer working to not undermine employer engagement and support for apprenticeship, we think there's just a couple of things that could be clarified in the rules. Number one, that the supportive services that are called for at times in the rule, we actually think supportive services are great if somebody's there to pay for them. But for an unsubsidized apprenticeship, we just think that adding that is a potential poison pill to an employer. We think that a provision that requires the proof of financial capacity to be able to offer an apprenticeship might require an employer to open up their books in a way that they would never want to do. And so we think that provision should be eliminated. And then we also think that as we think about some of the reporting obligations and requirements under these rules, and by the way, we're big believers in data. The chair of my board is a big researcher. He loves data. But we need to have a way to collect that data in a way that's efficient and not burdensome. And so we call on the department to invest in data management systems that support interoperability and will avoid some of those heavy costs of reporting. So I'm going to, again, stop here and take any questions. And then I just want to wrap up with a couple of comments about the comments process itself. Any questions?
Mike Peterson again with the
Yeah, hey, Mike. Yep.
Financial capacity in order to conduct your training. As far as eliminating the proof of it is one thing, but requiring that they have it, I think it should still be noted that you have to have financial capacity. If you're gonna, who's gonna pay your instructors? Who's gonna pay for your training materials, your mock-ups, your building, your light bills, all that other stuff? There's got to be some kind of financial capacity to run these things. So
yep.
I can see eliminating the proof, but you still should not eliminate that you got to have financial capacity to do it.
That's interesting. That it's stipulated that by applying, you're stipulating that you have the capacity. Okay, I maybe that's something we could work with. I might follow up with you on that, Mike. I think our understanding is that this stems from a somewhat high-profile apprenticeship effort in California that kind of went bust, and a lot of people sort of left left holding the strings. Our worry is that based on sort of one experience, we're sort of legislating or trying to regulate a sort of universal requirement. We think that this may be an overreaction to one particular episode, but let's you and me, Mike. Let's us talk a little bit and see if we can find a way to square the circle.
Yeah, I would just add that we always have to remember that this is a voluntary decision by an employer to start such a program, and it's hard to understand why someone who is going to invest in an apprenticeship would do so if they felt that by doing that it's going to undermine their business,
their own capacity, right?
We have to, I think sometimes by assuming the worst, we're going to stop a lot of good things from happening.
Right.
And, I think it is important to make judgments. We always do. But, developing these financial records for the Labor Department is not going to be a big sell.
Yeah, we've heard that over and over again. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there, and we're going to just I want have a couple of words to say about the comment process itself, and you're going to hear a bit from Apprenticeships for America on commenting going forward. The first is just to say these are proposed rules, right? These rules are not fixed, and we have every reason to believe, we have no reason to believe that the department isn't genuine in its call for comments and consideration from the field. So we're going to provide it. So we'll be certainly offering our comments, but the department needs to hear from more than just Apprenticeships for America. They need to hear from the field more broadly. And so we're really want to engage you all as partners and stakeholders in this effort to be part of a comments process. And we're going to try and make it as easy as possible for you to do that. So let me just give you a quick rundown of sort of what we're going to be doing at Apprenticeships for America to support that. The first thing is that we've actually put up on our website a direct conduit to the comments process. Through our website, you can submit a comment yourself. And by the way, if you were like me, first thinking about, oh gosh, if I'm going to do a comment, I mean, do I need a lawyer? It's the easiest thing in the world. You don't even need to find that squiggly S for the section number on your keyboard. We will make this really, really easy for you. If you go to our website, and we'll be providing you that link in just a second. If you go to our website, there's an opportunity for you to submit a comment. You fill out 3 boxes: your first name, your last name, your email. Click next, and then we actually give you a comment. If you want to just use our comment, you can just use our comment and submit, and you're done. You're also free to take the comment that we've authored for you and modify it, change it, or just delete the whole thing and start fresh with your own comment. All that's fair game. The advantage of submitting through us, number one, we make it really easy for you. But number two is that it helps us track the comments that are going in, which just helps us be a better advocate for the field in terms of comments that are going to the Department of Labor. But if you don't want to go through our website, you can go directly through the federalregister.gov website, where there is a pretty simple form itself, where you can provide your comments directly. The advantages of going through this form is, especially if you were going to use attachments, if you want to use a letter, or if you want to submit a longer comment, this is a great place to do that. Our website won't support attachments. We're going to have a toolkit that'll be distributed after this webinar that'll give you instructions on how to do all this, and some suggested language to use in comments. But again, we certainly have our view. We've written our report. We have our suggestions that maybe Randy and Mike are going to have us rethink some of, that we are that you're not bound, by our recommendations. And we'd certainly love you to jump in where you agree with them. But I think it's important that the department hear from everyone, all perspectives. So if you're pressed for time, use the AFA comment template. It'll be pre-populated into the website form. And literally you can do this in about 1 minute. If you have 15 minutes, you can customize that. You can add your own story, and add your own your own comments. If you have 5 minutes, just take our form and add a little bit about your organization, and that's all we're asking. And then if you're a comments nerd and really want to develop your own comments and really want to put together your own analysis and so on, our suggestion for a format is tell your story. Be sure you talk about what your organization is, who it's serving, what it's accomplishing, why you're doing good work. Name your interests. Tell the department what particular aspect of the rules that you want to speak to. Describe the impact of that rule that it would have on you or your partners or your stakeholders, and then name a recommended change. And that can be very, very specific, like you should change this wording, or it could be just very general, the department should consider. And you have flexibility on that. As the register.gov, federalregister.gov will say, it's not about the volume of comments, it's about the quality of the comments that come in, that they're really encouraging. So I think with that, I just want to say thank you to this group and to everybody else who's been part of this journey over the last 2 months as we've been working through the proposed rules. I'm going to open this up for further conversation. We have about 5 minutes for that conversation. Yeah, so I'll just say, just on the cookie cutter comments. So we've actually heard 2 things on that. So I think if you want to just use our template, we think any comment is better than no comment at all. It's better to modify it with your own voice, but any comment is better than no comment. Any other comments or reactions? Let me just ask my colleague Kyle, who is a big partner with me on the report. Anything I left off, or anything we should correct?
No, I think you did great. I just really want to emphasize that participating in this comment period is a form of advocacy, in that you need to, if you want to change the system and make the system better, you need to let the DOL know. John is very correct when he says they are genuine in that they are looking for feedback. They wouldn't have released this large of a rule, this expansive of a rule, if they were not genuinely trying to make the system better. So please take a look and participate.
Yes, Joanne, I just wanted to get back to you. There has been a call from a couple of quarters to expand the comment period. I'm likewise hearing that that's not going to happen. You never know. It's Washington. Anything can happen. But my sense is my intelligence matches your intelligence on that. So the 18th is the date we're working with.
Thank you.
I just want to thank everyone for participating. I think this is part of the AFA value added. Thanks to John and Kyle that we've put this together in a pretty short time. We've been doing a lot of thinking about it as well. And of course, we're not going to have complete agreement, but I think we have a consensus over a wide range of comments.
Thanks, Bob. And I think with there, we're going to leave it off. Anyone wants to stick around for a conversation after the recording is stopped is free to do so. In the meantime, have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for participating in this conversation. Thanks.